Former Army medic Rebecca Winters thought the dilapidated county hospital she purchased for $5,000 at a foreclosure auction was just a desperate gamble to secure affordable housing after 3 tours in Afghanistan left her with debilitating PTSD and mountains of medical debt that bankruptcy couldn't erase. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But when she discovered a sealed surgical suite behind a false wall in the abandoned operating wing, Rebecca uncovered something impossible: a forgotten Cold War-era diamond synthesis laboratory containing experimental carbon compression chambers that had produced flawless blue diamonds worth over $300 million, along with classified documents proving the facility had been deliberately abandoned in 1964 to conceal evidence of a government program so secret that even acknowledging its existence could reshape the global diamond market and expose a decades-old conspiracy involving military contractors, intelligence agencies, and international diamond cartels. This is the story of how a $5,000 foreclosure purchase and one veteran's determination transformed a homeless combat medic into the unexpected guardian of a scientific breakthrough so valuable that powerful organizations would stop at nothing to keep it buried. The October rain pounded against the cracked windows of County General like nature's own percussion, matching the throbbing in Rebecca Winters' left knee, a permanent souvenir from an IED that had cut short her military career and left her with a titanium rod where healthy bone should be. At 34, Rebecca stood before the condemned hospital's main entrance, rain soaking through her worn Army surplus jacket as she fumbled with a massive ring of keys that the county clerk had unceremoniously tossed across the counter after processing her payment, the last $5,000 of her combat pay savings that had survived 3 years of unemployment, medical treatments, and temporary housing solutions that had grown increasingly temporary as her funds dwindled. The property encompassed a sprawling 6-acre campus with a main 4-story hospital building, a smaller psychiatric ward, maintenance structures, and a staff housing complex that had once accommodated doctors during mandatory overnight shifts. According to the county assessor, the facility had been deemed structurally unsound for modern healthcare standards, environmentally compromised from decades of medical waste disposal practices that predated current regulations, and financially unviable for renovation due to asbestos, lead paint, and infrastructure issues that would cost millions to remediate. For anyone with conventional investment strategies or reasonable housing expectations, County General represented a catastrophic liability, but for a homeless veteran whose PTSD made sharing walls with neighbors in apartment buildings an exercise in psychological torture, the isolated hospital complex offered something priceless: space, privacy, and the possibility of converting even a small portion of the massive structure into livable quarters without landlords asking questions about her service-connected disabilities, or the nightmares that sometimes caused her to scream loud enough to wake an entire floor of neighbors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca's discharge from the Army had provided comprehensive medical care for her physical injuries, but had simultaneously catapulted her into a civilian healthcare system wholly unprepared to address the invisible wounds that made maintaining employment nearly impossible. Her personnel file listed impressive qualifications: combat medic with specialized training in trauma care, field surgery assistance, and emergency medicine under extreme condition skills. That should have made her a competitive candidate for paramedic positions or emergency department technician roles throughout the Midwest. What her resume couldn't explain was how fluorescent lighting triggered migraine episodes that left her incapacitated for days, how the unexpected sound of a car backfiring could send her diving for cover in the middle of a job interview, or How the smell of certain antiseptics used in civilian hospitals transported her immediately back to field hospitals where she'd fought to save soldiers whose bodies had been torn apart by explosives, similar to the one that had nearly taken her own life during her final deployment. The VA disability rating process had been a bureaucratic nightmare of appointments, appeals, and paperwork that had consumed 18 months before establishing a partial disability determination that provided $1,876 monthly, enough to theoretically survive if housing costs hadn't consumed nearly all of it in the small Midwestern city where the only VA hospital equipped to handle her complex case was located. The housing market had exploded during her deployment years, transforming formerly affordable neighborhoods into trendy urban renewal zones where one-bedroom apartments now commanded rents that exceeded her entire monthly benefit. Rebecca had explored every conventional housing program available to veterans, Section 8 vouchers with multi-year waiting lists, transitional housing programs with maximum stays of 6 months, VA-supported apartments that required roommate arrangements she couldn't maintain with her startled responses and night terrors, and subsidized senior facilities that wouldn't consider a younger veteran, regardless of disability status or service history. Each option had represented another closed door, another form rejection, another system that couldn't accommodate the complex needs of a combat veteran whose psychological wounds made standard housing solutions unworkable. The hospital property had appeared on a county foreclosure listing almost by accident. Rebecca had been researching abandoned properties outside city limits, where she might legally park the used camper she'd been saving for her last-ditch housing plan before winter. Temperatures would make vehicle living potentially lethal in the Midwest. The listing had been miscategorized under agricultural tax sales rather than commercial properties, explaining why no developers had bid on a 6-acre campus with structures that could be converted to apartment complexes or retirement communities. Once environmental remediation had been completed, her research into the hospital's operational history had revealed the standard pattern of rural healthcare consolidation that had decimated local medical facilities throughout America's heartland. County General had served as the primary healthcare provider for 3 rural counties from 1958 until 1997, when changing insurance reimbursement systems, population decline in agricultural communities, and competition from larger regional medical centers had rendered local hospitals financially unsustainable, without substantial government subsidies or charitable foundation support. The facility had operated at progressively reduced capacity throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, closing specialized departments, reducing bed counts, and eliminating services until only emergency care and basic medical support remained available. To a community that increasingly had to travel 50 miles to the nearest city for comprehensive health care. The final closure had occurred with little fanfare, a simple announcement in the local newspaper that emergency services would be redirected to regional facilities, and that the building would be maintained in standby status, pending potential future healthcare needs or alternative development options. But certain details about the hospital's operational timeline presented inconsistencies that didn't align with typical rural hospital closure patterns. Unlike most comparable facilities that were promptly liquidated through asset sales and repurposed for alternative community uses, County General had remained under sealed county ownership for decades with minimal maintenance but strict security protocols that prevented public access or redevelopment proposals from being considered by local government agencies. The property records documented that the hospital had remained in complex legal ownership arrangements involving county government, federal agencies, and private corporations with obscure connections to military contractors who specialized in advanced materials research and development programs that typically operated under classified contracts for the Department of Defense. The ownership evolution suggested deliberate efforts to maintain control over supposedly worthless rural property rather than simple administrative neglect due to limited redevelopment potential. Rebecca's immediate survival priorities couldn't accommodate curiosity about institutional mysteries. When winter temperatures were already dropping into the low 40s at night, and her current housing situation, a series of 2-week motel stays interspersed with nights sleeping in her car when funds ran low, was becoming increasingly untenable as her savings dwindled and her disability benefits disappeared into the black hole of basic survival expenses. That left nothing for security deposits or first month's rent payments that might secure conventional housing. Her plan was straightforward: identify one section of the massive facility that could be made weathertight and habitable with minimal investment, establish basic utilities without attracting attention from county inspectors who might enforce occupancy restrictions, and create a private sanctuary where she could begin addressing her psychological healing without the constant stress of housing insecurity that had derailed every previous attempt at establishing post-military stability. The foreclosure auction had proceeded exactly according to her projections. No competing bidders had appeared for property that represented enormous environmental liability rather than development opportunity, allowing her to secure ownership with her minimum $5,000 bid. The main entrance doors protested with decades of accumulated rust as Rebecca finally located the correct key and forced the lock mechanism to turn. The smell hit her immediately, that distinctive blend of institutional disinfectant, mildew, and decay that characterized abandoned healthcare facilities. For most people, the odor would have been repulsive, but for Rebecca, it carried an odd comfort, the familiar smell of a medical environment, reminiscent of the field hospitals where she had worked with single-minded purpose and clarity that civilian life had never managed to provide. The entry lobby retained ghostly evidence of its former function: massive reception desk now covered in dust and bird droppings, faded signage directing patients to departments that no longer existed, and waiting area furniture that had somehow escaped the salvage operations that had stripped most valuable equipment and fixtures when the facility officially closed. Beams of late afternoon sunlight penetrated through broken windows, creating theatrical spotlights that illuminated swirling dust particles and revealed the scale of the renovation challenge she had undertaken with limited resources and no construction experience beyond basic field engineering she'd learned during deployment. Rebecca moved methodically through the ground floor, employing the systematic room-clearing techniques that military training had burned into her muscle memory. Each doorway represented a potential hazard: structural damage that could cause injury, wildlife that had taken up residence in the abandoned building, or human occupants who might have found their way inside, despite the exterior security measures that had theoretically protected the property from trespassers. The central corridor stretched nearly 200 yards, branching into departments that had once bustled with medical activity: emergency services with trauma bays now stripped of equipment, an imaging center with mounting brackets where expensive diagnostic machines had once stood, and administrative offices where patient records had been processed before electronic medical systems had rendered paper documentation obsolete. Each space told the story of rural healthcare economics: progressive downsizing, equipment transfers to more profitable facilities, and the slow death of community medical services as populations declined and healthcare became increasingly centralized. In urban centers, the former emergency department showed evidence of being the last section to close, with more recent paint colors and floor materials than other areas. Rebecca noted the potential of this space closer to exterior doors for material transport, designed with independent electrical systems for emergency operations, and configured with plumbing that might be more easily restored than residential style. Bathrooms scattered throughout patient wings. The trauma bay could become a functional living space with relatively modest modifications, providing approximately 500 square feet of open-concept living area where monitoring equipment and treatment stations had once stood. As sunset approached, Rebecca retreated to her car to retrieve the supplies she'd brought for her first night of ownership: a military-grade sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, battery-powered lanterns that could provide light without risking electrical fires in the compromised wiring system, basic tools for securing entry points against unwanted visitors, and enough food and water for 3 days of initial assessment before she would need to establish more permanent resource supplies. The night passed with the hypervigilance that had become Rebecca's constant companion since deployment, sleeping in 90-minute increments between perimeter checks, startling fully awake at the sound of settling structures or nocturnal wildlife, movements within the walls, and maintaining mental maps of exit routes and defensive positions that combat experience had taught her to identify automatically in any new environment. By morning, she had established a secure base of operations in what had once been the emergency department break room, a space with intact windows, a door that could be locked from the inside, and proximity to former restroom facilities that might be restored to functionality with minimal plumbing repairs. The first week of ownership passed in a blur of practical survival tasks, identifying structural hazards that required immediate attention, locating the main utility connections that could potentially restore basic services, and establishing security measures that would prevent unwanted exploration by local teenagers or homeless individuals who might view the abandoned hospital as an attractive shelter option now that autumn temperatures were dropping toward winter conditions. The eastern wing of the main building proved most promising for immediate habitability. Its newer construction had withstood years of neglect better than original sections dating from the 1950s, and its proximity to utility connections meant potentially simpler restoration of basic services that would make winter survival possible. The former surgical department occupied the second floor of this wing, a self-contained unit that had been designed with independent environmental controls, separate electrical systems, and enhanced security features appropriate for areas where controlled substances and valuable equipment had been stored. The surgical wing's double doors had been secured with padlocks that didn't match the master key set provided by the county clerk, an inconsistency that caught Rebecca's attention as she systematically explored potential living spaces throughout the complex. Unlike other departments that showed evidence of orderly decommissioning and equipment removal, the surgical suite entrance displayed signs of hasty security measures applied after the main facility closure. Newer lock systems, reinforced door frames, and warning signs with federal penalty notifications that seemed excessive for standard hospital liability concerns. Rebecca's military experience had taught her to notice patterns that didn't align with stated scenarios or official explanations, the small inconsistencies that often revealed deeper truths about situations that others had intentionally obscured for strategic advantage or operational security. The surgical department's security measures represented the kind of hardening typically reserved for sensitive materials storage or research areas containing proprietary technology not standard operating rooms in rural hospitals that had supposedly closed due to economic factors and changing healthcare delivery models. The bolt cutters from her basic toolkit made short work of the padlocks, revealing another layer of security beyond a keypad entry system that had once required electronic access credentials, but now sat dormant, its LED indicator dark after years without power. The door mechanism itself had defaulted to locked position when power had been cut, a standard safety protocol for controlled areas that prevented unauthorized access during emergency situations. Rebecca examined the keypad with professional interest, noting its manufacturing specifications and design generation that placed its installation in the early 1990s, decades more recent than the hospital's original construction and significantly more sophisticated than security systems typically installed in rural medical facilities during that era. The electronic lock represented military-grade security that she recognized from secure facilities where she had received specialized medical training for deployment preparation, not standard hospital access control technology from the period. when County General had operated as a community healthcare provider. Her toolkit included a portable power pack designed for jump-starting vehicles, a multifunction emergency device that could also power small electronics and tools when conventional electricity wasn't available. Connecting the power leads to the keypad's exposed wiring produced immediate results. The LED display illuminated, revealing that the security system remained operational despite years of dormancy. The default administrative override code that manufacturers had built into early electronic security systems, a standard backdoor protocol that military personnel were taught for emergency access during power failures or communication disruptions, produced a satisfying click as the magnetic locks disengaged. The surgical department beyond the security doors presented an entirely different environment than the decaying hospital wing she had explored previously. Unlike other sections where equipment removal had left obvious gaps and decommissioning was evident in every room, the surgical suite appeared frozen in time. Operating rooms, with equipment still mounted on ceiling booms, surgical lights positioned as if awaiting the next procedure, and supply cabinets with intact inventory systems that suggested preparation for continued use rather than facility closure. The preservation conditions were remarkable given the decades of abandonment, minimal dust accumulation, absence of the mold and mildew that characterized other wings, and environmental stability that had protected sensitive equipment from the FIVA. Temperature and humidity fluctuations that typically accelerated deterioration in unoccupied structures. The surgical suite had been designed with independent environmental controls, separate from the hospital's main VAS system, a standard feature for infection control and specialized procedure requirements. But the preservation quality suggested that these systems had continued functioning long after the main facility closure or had been designed with passive conservation capabilities that maintained stable conditions without active mechanical operation. Rebecca's medical training immediately recognized the value of the preserved equipment. Surgical stations that would have commanded hundreds of thousands of dollars on the secondary market, diagnostic systems that smaller hospitals and field clinics worldwide would consider priceless additions to their capabilities, and specialized instruments that represented significant investment even by modern healthcare standards. The abandonment of such valuable resources contradicted every aspect of normal hospital closure procedures, where equipment liquidation typically represented the final opportunity to recover financial value from failing institutions before property disposition. The central operating room contained 4 surgical suites arranged around a central nurse's station, a standard configuration for facilities designed during the period when County General had been constructed. 3 of the suites contained typical surgical setups appropriate for general procedures, orthopedic operations, and basic trauma intervention capabilities expected in rural hospitals, serving agricultural communities where farm accidents and vehicle crashes represented the most common emergency scenarios requiring surgical intervention. But the 4th operating room deviated dramatically from standard medical configurations, its equipment arrangement, monitoring systems, and specialized infrastructure suggesting research functions rather than patient treatment objectives. The room contained what appeared to be pressure vessels, specialized containment units, and monitoring equipment more appropriate for material science laboratories than surgical facilities serving rural populations with conventional medical needs. The centerpiece of this anomalous space was a series of cylindrical chambers, approximately 4 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter, constructed from what appeared to be military-grade alloys with viewing ports of crystalline material that resembled diamond rather than conventional glass or transparent polymers typically used in medical equipment. The chambers were connected to control systems through shielded conduits that suggested high-energy applications rather than the fluid and gas connections standard in medical devices from any era of hospital operation. The control systems connected to the chambers contained documentation unlike anything Rebecca had ever encountered in medical Environment's technical specifications for what appeared to be diamond synthesis processes. Research data recording pressure and temperature parameters that exceeded anything in conventional manufacturing. And experimental protocols referencing crystal formation techniques that suggested artificial production of gemstones rather than medical procedures of any recognized type. The technical manuals bore classification markings that Rebecca recognized from her military service compartmentalized information, designations that restricted access to personnel with specific security clearances and project authorizations that typically indicated Department of Defense or intelligence agency oversight rather than civilian medical research or commercial development programs. The documentation referenced Project Carbon Forge, a name that appeared nowhere in publicly available records of government research initiatives or academic materials, science programs that Rebecca had encountered during her extensive military medical training. Adjacent to the primary operating room was what appeared to be a materials analysis laboratory, a space equipped with specialized imaging systems, spectrographic analysis equipment, and testing apparatus designed to evaluate physical properties of manufactured substances rather than biological samples, typically examined in hospital pathology departments. The equipment configuration suggested capabilities for assessing hardness, optical characteristics, and structural integrity of crystalline materials evaluation protocols, appropriate for gemstone quality assessment rather than medical diagnostics or patient care applications. The laboratory contained storage cabinets with security features, exceeding anything found in conventional medical facilities, biometric locks that had defaulted to closed position when power was removed, reinforced construction that would resist forced entry even with substantial tools, and what appeared to be explosive tamper prevention systems designed to destroy cabinet contents if unauthorized access was attempted through mechanical means. These security measures represented military-grade protection protocols, appropriate for classified materials or substances with extraordinary monetary value, not standard precautions for medical supplies or research materials in civilian healthcare. Environments. Rebecca's exploration revealed a second layer of security beyond the main surgical suite entrance, a false wall constructed to appear as standard supply cabinetry, but concealing a hidden doorway accessible only through a concealed mechanism that had been designed to remain operational even without electrical power. The hidden door's engineering displayed sophistication beyond typical hospital construction precision machine components, specialized materials resistant to environmental degradation, and mechanical systems that had maintained functionality despite decades without maintenance or operational testing. The space beyond the hidden entrance expanded into what could only be described as a production facility, a room approximately 30 feet square, containing equipment configurations that resembled industrial manufacturing systems rather than anything associated with patient care or conventional medical research. The centerpiece was a massive pressure vessel surrounded by control systems, power management equipment, and monitoring stations that suggested high-energy processes requiring precise parameter management and substantial safety protocols to prevent catastrophic failure during operation. The pressure vessel itself was constructed from specialized alloys with characteristics suggesting military aerospace applications rather than medical equipment manufacturing, heat dissipation systems, reinforcement structures, and safety containment. Features that indicated processes involving extreme temperatures and pressures, beyond anything used in conventional healthcare or commercial manufacturing environments. The vessel's design incorporated viewing ports similar to those on the smaller chambers in the main operating room, crystalline materials with optical clarity and structural integrity that exceeded standard industrial specifications for high pressure observation systems. The manufacturing area contained workstations arranged in a production sequence, material preparation systems, quality control checkpoints, and what appeared to be finishing equipment designed for processing small objects. with extraordinary precision and environmental control throughout each manufacturing stage. The workflow configuration suggested small batch production of high-value items, rather than the mass manufacturing arrangements typical in commercial industrial facilities or medical supply production operations. Rebecca's military training included recognition of classified research facilities and unauthorized access protocols for situations where service members might accidentally encounter restricted areas during deployment or domestic operations. The standard procedure was immediate withdrawal, security notification, and documentation of accidental exposure without further exploration or information gathering that might compromise operational security or expose personnel to information beyond their clearance levels. But her current circumstances provided no chain of command for reporting classified discoveries, no security officers to notify about potential breaches, and no clear guidance for civilian handling of apparently abandoned government research facilities that had been inadvertently purchased through public auction processes that shouldn't have included classified property disposition. The rational response would have been immediate departure and contact with appropriate authorities, but which authorities would those be for a homeless veteran who had invested her last financial resources in property that might now be reclaimed through national security provisions, leaving her with neither shelter nor funds to secure alternative housing before winter conditions made outdoor living potentially lethal? The VA had already demonstrated limited ability to address her basic housing needs through conventional programs. How would they respond to a situation involving classified facilities and potential security breaches that exceeded their administrative capabilities and jurisdictional authority? Her combat-trained instincts for threat assessment and survival planning shifted into operational mode, the methodical evaluation of available information, identification of potential courses of action, and calculation of risk factors associated with each possible decision path that might address her immediate security concerns while navigating complex legal and institutional challenges beyond her individual control capabilities. The facility's concealment methods and ongoing security systems indicated that someone had invested substantial resources in maintaining secrecy around whatever research had occurred within the hidden sections of County General, suggesting either continued interest in the technology or persistent concerns about disclosure of activities that had occurred decades earlier. The question became whether abandonment represented program completion, with subsequent security oversight failures during property disposition, or deliberate concealment of activities that were never intended for public disclosure, regardless of time passage or change in government research priorities. As Rebecca contemplated these questions, she discovered a document storage room adjacent to the production facility, a space containing filing cabinets with historical records that might provide context for the mysterious equipment and research protocols she had encountered in the hidden sections of the hospital complex. Unlike modern facilities where records would be maintained in digital formats with sophisticated encryption and access controls, this operation had existed during an era when paper documentation remained the primary method for recording classified research activities and experimental results that couldn't be trusted to early computer systems with limited security capabilities. The files revealed an operation far more significant than she had initially imagined, a joint program between the Department of Defense, intelligence agencies, and private contractors specializing in advanced materials development for military applications with potential civilian technological transfer capabilities. The project documentation dated from 1958 through 1964, coinciding with the hospital's construction and early operational period, but preceding the main facility's public healthcare functions that had continued for decades after the classified research apparently ceased. Project Carbon Forge had been established to develop synthetic diamond production capabilities exceeding anything available through commercial manufacturing processes of the era, creating materials with exceptional hardness, optical properties, and structural characteristics that could serve multiple military applications, including armor systems, cutting tools for specialized manufacturing, and components for advanced weapon systems requiring materials performance beyond conventional metallurgical capabilities. The research had focused particularly on creating blue diamonds with specific optical and electrical properties that natural stones rarely exhibited, characteristics that made them valuable not just as gemstones, but as components in advanced sensing systems, communications technology, and weapons guidance mechanisms that represented cutting-edge military capabilities during the early Cold War period. The blue coloration resulted from boron integration within the carbon lattice structure, a manufacturing technique that simultaneously created semiconductor properties, potentially useful for early electronic systems being developed for military applications. But the most extraordinary aspect of the program, revealed through documentation, was the apparent success achieved by research teams working within the concealed facility production capabilities that had generated synthetic diamonds of exceptional quality, consistency, and size that exceeded anything commercially available through conventional manufacturing processes, even by modern standards. The experimental protocols had apparently solved technical challenges that mainstream diamond synthesis companies wouldn't overcome for decades after Project Carbon Forge had been officially terminated in 1964. The termination documentation revealed the project's most disturbing aspect: the research hadn't been ended due to technical failures, resource limitations, or changing military priorities, as typically occurred with experimental programs that didn't achieve desired outcomes. Instead, termination orders referenced market stability concerns and international economic implications that suggested successful outcomes, with consequences extending beyond military applications into global economic systems and international relations that military research programs rarely affected directly. Additional files contained communications between project administrators and representatives from organizations that appeared to be connected to international diamond cartels, companies controlling global gemstone distribution, pricing structures, and market access that had dominated the industry since the early 20th century. The correspondence suggested that Project Carbon Forge had demonstrated production capabilities that threatened the fundamental economic model underlying diamond valuation and distribution worldwide, creating potential for market collapse if synthetic stones of indistinguishable quality from natural diamonds became widely available through government programs or commercial technology transfer initiatives that typically followed successful military research projects. The termination agreement included provisions for technology containment, research team dispersal, and facility decommissioning under extraordinary security protocols that exceeded standard procedures for discontinued military programs. The documentation described arrangements for converting the research facility into an operational rural hospital that would provide cover for the classified infrastructure while maintaining security systems that would prevent access to areas containing equipment, technical documentation, and most significantly production output that had been sealed within the facility rather than transferred to military storage facilities or government research archives, where standard inventory procedures might create records accessible through conventional oversight mechanisms. The final pages of the termination documentation included inventory records that explained the extraordinary security measures and ongoing surveillance systems that had remained operational decades after the project's official conclusion. Production output including over 2,400 synthetic blue diamonds ranging from 2 to 15 carats, with quality characteristics that would place their market value between $125,000 and $5.2 million per stone in contemporary gemstone markets, where natural blue diamonds commanded premium prices due to their extreme rarity and exceptional color characteristics. The inventory represented potential market value exceeding $300 million. By conservative estimates explaining security, Measures that would seem excessive for abandoned medical equipment, but entirely appropriate for materials that combined extraordinary monetary value with military technology implications and potential economic disruption capabilities if introduced into global markets without controlled distribution mechanisms. Rebecca's discovery had transformed her housing solution into something far more complex: property containing classified military technology, evidence of government collaboration with international cartels to suppress market-disrupting innovations, and physical assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars that various organizations would have compelling motivations to recover through whatever means necessary once they became aware that the forgotten facility had been inadvertently sold. Through public auction processes that should never have included classified property or assets of such extraordinary value. The security implications extended beyond potential legal complications regarding classified technology or questions about property rights under national security provisions. The inventory represented financial stakes significant enough to motivate extraordinary recovery efforts by multiple parties whose interests might range from legitimate government security concerns to private sector organizations whose market positions and profit margins depended on maintaining artificial scarcity in global diamond markets. As she processed these revelations, Rebecca noticed subtle evidence that she might not have been the first person to discover the hidden facility since its official abandonment. Slight disturbances in dust patterns on certain documents, minor displacement of equipment components that suggested previous examination, and what appeared to be recent access attempts on the storage cabinets containing the most valuable physical assets. These indicators suggested that someone had located the facility previously, but had been unable to breach the final security measures protecting the actual diamond inventory, likely deterred by the sophisticated locking mechanisms and destructive countermeasures designed to eliminate contents if improper access was attempted. This realization added urgency to her already complex situation. If others were aware of the facility's contents, but had been unable to access the secured materials, her purchase of the property might have inadvertently inserted her into ongoing surveillance operations by unknown parties, waiting for opportunities to attempt recovery without triggering security systems that would destroy the valuable inventory. Her presence as the legal property owner could provide cover for activities that would otherwise attract attention from security patrols or local authorities monitoring the supposedly abandoned hospital complex. The immediate tactical concerns became clear. She needed to determine whether the facility remained under active surveillance, identify security vulnerabilities that might allow hostile access without her knowledge, and establish defensive measures that would protect both her physical safety and her legal rights to property that had been legitimately purchased through county auction processes, regardless of the seller's failure to properly screen the property for classified contents or extraordinary value assets before public disposition. Her military training provided advantages that typical civilian property owners would lack in such circumstances: familiarity with surveillance detection techniques, understanding of security system vulnerabilities, and tactical planning capabilities that could identify potential approach routes, defensive positions, and response options for various threat scenarios that might emerge once interested parties became aware of her discovery and her status as legal owner of assets that numerous organizations would have compelling motivations to recover through whatever means available. Rebecca conducted a systematic security assessment of the hospital complex, identifying entrance points, establishing sensor coverage for early warning capabilities, and creating defensive positions that would provide tactical advantages if confrontation became unavoidable. Despite her preference for resolution through legal channels and proper governmental authorities, once she had established sufficient security to protect her immediate interests and physical safety, the county auction documentation provided unexpected legal advantages. The property transfer had been conducted through formal government processes with complete chain of custody documentation, proper public notice requirements, and official. Recording procedures that established her clear legal ownership regardless of whether the county had properly assessed the property's contents before sale. The transaction had occurred without contingency clauses, security provisions, or conditional transfer language that might have provided recourse for recovering classified materials or valuable assets inadvertently included in the property disposition. This legal foundation provided leverage that might prove valuable in negotiations with government agencies that would inevitably become involved once she reported the classified technology discovery, allowing potential arrangements that could address national security concerns while recognizing her legitimate property rights and financial interests in a transaction that had been completed through proper legal channels despite institutional failures in property assessment and security protocols. As she completed her initial security assessment and began formulating plans for contacting appropriate authorities, Rebecca discovered monitoring equipment in what had once been the hospital's administrative office's surveillance systems that appeared to have been installed long after the facility's closure, and that utilized technology far more recent than the 1960s research equipment or 1990s hospital systems. The monitoring equipment included digital recording capabilities, wireless transmission systems, and power supply arrangements suggesting installation within the past 5 years, long after the hospital's official closure, but well before her purchase through county auction. The surveillance system architecture indicated professional installation by individuals with advanced technical capabilities, and operational security awareness components had been concealed within existing infrastructure. Power supplies had been tapped into remaining electrical systems that wouldn't trigger utility monitoring, and communication links had been established through methods that wouldn't create detectable emissions or connection patterns that standard security sweeps might identify during routine property monitoring by county maintenance personnel or law enforcement conducting occasional patrols of abandoned properties. The modern surveillance equipment confirmed her suspicions that others had identified the facility's significance and had been monitoring it for potential recovery opportunities, likely aware of the valuable contents, but unable to breach final security measures without triggering destructive countermeasures or creating evidence of forced entry that might prompt official investigation. The monitoring system architecture suggested professional capabilities beyond typical criminal organizations, indicating government agencies, military contractors, or corporate entities with specialized security operations and significant resources, devoted to recovering assets that had apparently been forgotten by official oversight mechanisms, but remembered by individuals or organizations with knowledge of the original project and its extraordinary outcomes. Rebecca's combat experience had taught her that information advantages often determine survival outcomes in complex threat environments. Understanding hostile capabilities, intentions, and timeline constraints provided tactical opportunities that could transform seemingly impossible situations into manageable challenges with potential for favorable resolution, despite resource limitations or numerical disadvantages. The surveillance system provided exactly this type of information advantage, revealing that she was being watched, identifying the technological capabilities of those conducting surveillance, and potentially allowing communication interception that could reveal intentions and planned operations before they could be executed against her position. The monitoring equipment included digital storage components that might contain recorded surveillance data, potentially revealing identities, operational patterns, and organizational affiliations of those who had been observing the facility before her purchase. Accessing this intelligence without alerting the surveillance operators would require careful technical intervention and operational security measures that would prevent detection of her. Awareness that monitoring systems were in place and actively recording her activities throughout the hospital complex. Her military technical training included basic electronic countermeasures and information security protocols, sufficient knowledge to understand surveillance system architectures without specialized equipment or advanced expertise that would have been available in military operational environments, but was beyond her current resource limitations as a homeless veteran operating independently without institutional support or team capabilities that combat operations typically provided. The surveillance system utilized commercial components. Despite its professional installation characteristics, standard digital recording equipment, CONVENTIONO power management systems, and communication modules that incorporated consumer-grade technology rather than specialized military or intelligence agency hardware that would have incorporated more sophisticated encryption, transmission security, or remote management capabilities. This technical limitation provided potential exploitation opportunities that might not have existed with more advanced surveillance infrastructure, typically deployed in high-security governmental operations or corporate espionage activities targeting extremely valuable assets or classified technology. Rebecca formulated a counterintelligence strategy that would utilize these technical vulnerabilities while maintaining operational security that would prevent surveillance operators from detecting her awareness of their monitoring activities, allowing her to gather intelligence about potential threats while preserving tactical surprise capabilities that might prove crucial if confrontation became unavoidable, despite her preference for resolution through proper legal channels and appropriate governmental authorities. The first phase involved establishing a misleading behavioral pattern that would appear consistent with a homeless veteran simply seeking shelter in an abandoned building, conducting obvious survival activities in visible areas while concealing her awareness of the hidden facility and its extraordinary contents. This deception would prevent surveillance operators from escalating recovery operations while she gathered intelligence, established security measures, and developed response options for various scenarios that might emerge once she initiated contact with appropriate authorities regarding the classified technology and valuable assets contained within her legally purchased property. Rebecca's investigation of the surveillance equipment revealed unexpected complexity beyond the digital recording systems visible within the main administrative areas. A network of monitoring devices extended throughout the hospital complex, with particular concentration around access points to the hidden research facility and storage areas containing the most valuable materials. The system architecture suggested professional security operations with capabilities exceeding typical private security contractors or local law enforcement, indicating either government agencies conducting classified recovery operations or corporate entities with extraordinary resources dedicated to monitoring property containing assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The intelligence value of this discovery extended beyond simple awareness of being watched. The surveillance network provided potential information sources about organizations interested in the facility's contents, operational capabilities available to potential recovery teams, and communication systems that might reveal planned operations before execution could endanger her position or legal rights to property purchased through legitimate government auction processes. The monitoring equipment included signal transmission components that sent data to remote receiving stations, creating potential vulnerability that could be exploited to identify surveillance operators through signal tracking or data interception techniques if she could access appropriate technical resources without alerting those conducting the monitoring operations. Rebecca's search for additional information sources revealed an unexpected resource, a hidden storage room containing what appeared to be personal effects from the original research team members, including journals, photographs, and correspondence that provided context beyond the official documentation found in project files. These materials had apparently been secured separately from technical documentation, suggesting personal records rather than official project components that would have been subject to classification protocols and removal procedures. During facility decommissioning, the journals revealed the human dimension behind the technical project documentation, The excitement of scientific breakthroughs, ethical concerns about potential applications, and personal conflicts that developed as researchers realized their work might be suppressed rather than celebrated, despite extraordinary technical achievements that represented significant advancement in materials science and manufacturing capabilities. The writings portrayed scientists who had believed they were contributing to national defense capabilities only to discover their innovations threatened economic interests powerful enough to override military technology development priorities. During an era when Cold War competition typically dominated resource allocation and security classifications, Dr. Eleanor Blackwell's journal provided the most comprehensive personal account. The project's lead scientist had documented not just technical achievements, but the political pressures and ethical conflicts that eventually led to program termination. Despite extraordinary success in creating synthetic diamonds that exceeded natural stones in consistency, color quality, and potential industrial applications that extended far beyond decorative purposes associated with gemstones in consumer markets, Dr. Blackwell had apparently anticipated the program's termination and had taken extraordinary measures to preserve both technical documentation and physical evidence of the project's achievements, creating the hidden storage systems and security measures that had protected both information and physical assets from recovery teams sent to decommission the facility after official termination orders were issued in 1964. Her journal described preparations for what she called future vindication, when economic interests would no longer override scientific advancement and public benefit that could result from manufacturing capabilities developed through Project Carbon Forge. The most revealing entry described arrangements made with hospital administrators and local officials who had been promised healthcare facilities serving their rural community, a negotiated agreement that converted classified research space into functional medical facilities while maintaining hidden access to areas containing equipment, documentation, and physical assets that would remain secured until circumstances permitted proper recognition of achievements that had been suppressed for reasons unrelated to technical merit or national security concerns. Dr. Blackwell's final journal entries revealed that she had created deadman security protocols designed to maintain protections indefinitely without active monitoring, systems that would preserve facility contents while preventing unauthorized access through destructive countermeasures if improper entry was attempted. These measures explained how the facility had remained secure despite decades of abandonment and suggested that proper access might still be possible through authentication protocols documented in materials that had survived beyond official program termination and decommissioning operations. The journals also contained personal observations about team members, including Dr. William Chun, whose background in crystallography had provided crucial insights into formation processes that enabled the breakthrough manufacturing techniques developed during Project Carbon Forge. Dr. Chun had apparently departed the program before official termination, reassigned to other classified research under circumstances that Dr. Blackwell described as troubling and potentially coerced, after he had expressed concerns about suppressing technology with potential medical applications beyond military or industrial uses initially emphasized in project objectives. Rebecca's military training had included historical case studies of classified programs, where scientific advancement had been delayed or suppressed when powerful interests perceived threats to existing economic structures or institutional advantages technologies. From synthetic rubber to advanced energy systems had sometimes disappeared into classified archives when their development threatened established industries with sufficient political influence to override even significant military or public benefit that might have resulted from deployment through normal technology transfer processes that typically followed successful government research programs. The personal materials provided context beyond official documentation, revealing that Project Carbon Forge had achieved manufacturing capabilities that threatened fundamental market structures, underlying international diamond cartels whose business models depended on controlling supply of stones that their marketing had positioned as inherently valuable and naturally scarce, despite industry practices that artificially limited distribution to maintain premium pricing for stones that were significantly more common than consumer perception suggested. The breakthrough manufacturing techniques developed within the hidden facility had demonstrated capacity to produce synthetic diamonds indistinguishable from natural stones through any testing methods available during the 1960s, creating potential for market disruption that would have affected not just luxury goods segments but international finance systems where diamond reserves served as hard assets, supporting currency valuations and trade relationships between nations whose economic stability partly depended on controlled commodity markets, including precious stones and metals. This historical context explained both the extraordinary security measures and the apparent attention from modern surveillance operations. The facility contained not just valuable physical assets, but evidence of deliberate market manipulation and technology suppression that could create significant legal liability for organizations still operating within international diamond markets. The documentation and physical evidence could potentially support antitrust proceedings, consumer fraud litigation, and regulatory interventions in markets still governed by pricing structures and supply limitations established through cartel operations that Project Carbon Forge had threatened decades earlier. Rebecca's systematic exploration of the facility revealed additional resources that might prove crucial for both security operations and potential negotiation leverage. Technical documentation that would allow restoration of manufacturing capabilities demonstrated during the original research program. The production equipment remained intact within the sealed facility, and operating manuals contained maintenance procedures, SDARTUP protocols, and manufacturing parameters that had produced the extraordinary gemstones cataloged in inventory. Records and preserved within secured storage systems that had maintained environmental controls despite the facility's official abandonment. The technical capability represented by this documentation extended beyond simple historical evidence. It provided potential for resuming production operations, using techniques that would still be considered advanced by contemporary manufacturing standards. The project had developed processes for creating blue diamonds with specific optical and electrical properties that remained rare in natural stones and difficult to achieve through commercial synthetic production methods available in modern markets. Where diamond manufacturing had advanced significantly since Project Carbon Forge's termination, but still hadn't achieved the quality characteristics documented in the facility's technical records. This realization transformed Rebecca's tactical position from simply discovering valuable historical assets to potentially controlling manufacturing capabilities that would still command significant market value and technical advantages in contemporary materials science applications, creating leverage beyond the physical inventory already secured within the facility. The technical knowledge represented ongoing value that extended beyond the gemstones themselves, particularly for industrial applications where specific performance characteristics remained more important than decorative qualities emphasized in consumer markets. The combination of historical documentation, physical inventory, and technical manufacturing capabilities created multiple negotiation options for addressing her situation, ranging from straightforward property claims regarding assets purchased through legitimate government auction processes to potential technology licensing arrangements that could provide ongoing revenue from manufacturing techniques still valuable in contemporary materials science applications across multiple industries, including medical devices, electronics manufacturing, and advanced sensing systems used in both civilian and military contexts. Rebecca's immediate tactical concerns remained focused on security operations that would protect her physical safety and legal interests while she developed options for proper resolution through appropriate governmental authorities and potential corporate partnerships that could address both national security considerations and her legitimate property rights as owner of assets, acquired through proper legal channels despite institutional failures in property assessment before public auction. The surveillance system architecture provided opportunities for intelligence gathering without alerting monitoring operators to her awareness of their activities. The commercial components included standard data storage and transmission vulnerabilities that could be exploited with basic electronic countermeasures available through consumer electronics that wouldn't trigger suspicion if included in supplies she visibly brought into the facility during her apparent homeless veteran occupancy of the abandoned hospital complex. Rebecca's plan began with establishing misleading behavioral patterns that would appear consistent with simple survival activities, while concealing her awareness of the hidden facility and its extraordinary contents. This deception provided operational security while she gathered intelligence about surveillance operators, established defensive measures around critical access points, and developed communications that would initiate proper governmental involvement through channels that would recognize both national security considerations and her legal property rights. The surveillance equipment revealed multiple monitoring organizations rather than coordinated operations by a single entity. Different system components, installation techniques, and transmission protocols suggested competing interests operating independently without awareness of other surveillance activities targeting the same facility. This competition created potential advantages through information compartmentalization and organizational rivalries that might be leveraged during negotiation phases once official contact had been established with appropriate authorities. While maintaining her deception operations, Rebecca began systematic preparations for proper resolution through legitimate channels, organizing documentation that established her legal ownership, cataloging evidence of the facility's classified history and contents, and developing communication strategies that would attract appropriate attention from authorities, capable of addressing both security concerns and property rights without triggering premature intervention by organizations whose interests might favor asset seizure without proper compensation or legal recognition of her ownership position, established through county auction processes. The facility's communications equipment included secure transmission capabilities that had been designed for classified operations during the original research program, systems that could potentially establish contact with governmental authorities through channels monitored for national security communications rather than conventional law enforcement or administrative contacts that might lack authority to address classified technology or high-value assets beyond normal property disposal procedures. These secure channels provided potential for initiating contact with appropriate authorities, while minimizing risk of interception by surveillance operators, who might attempt intervention before official security protocols could be established. Rebecca's preparation efforts were interrupted by evidence of escalating surveillance activities, increased data transmission from monitoring equipment, new system components installed near primary access points, and occasional perimeter testing that suggested preparation for potential entry operations rather than simply passive monitoring of facility status. These indicators created urgency beyond her original timeline estimates, suggesting that surveillance operators might have detected something that accelerated their operational planning, despite her careful deception measures and systematic security precautions. The surveillance escalation coincided with county administrative activities that seemed suspiciously focused on her recent property purchase requests for inspection access, citing environmental compliance concerns, tax reassessment notifications, suggesting potential challenges to the auction process, and licensing inquiries regarding occupancy permits for structures classified as condemned in official property records. These administrative measures appeared coordinated rather than routine bureaucratic procedures, suggesting potential pressure on local government officials from organizations interested in creating legal complications that might undermine her ownership claims or provide pretext for official intervention that could bypass normal property rights protections. These developments forced acceleration of her communication strategy. The potential for imminent intervention created urgency that outweighed benefits of additional preparation, time, or more comprehensive documentation of facility contents, and her legal ownership position established through proper auction procedures and recorded title transfer process through county administrative systems. The immediate priority shifted to establishing official contact through secure channels that would recognize both national security implications and property rights considerations before competing interests could create irreversible complications. Through either covert entry operations or manipulated administrative procedures that might temporarily override normal legal protections while creating permanent damage to her ownership claims. The facility's secure communication system required power restoration and technical adjustments to establish connectivity with modern networks that had replaced the original dedicated transmission infrastructure installed during active research operations. Rebecca's technical training provided sufficient knowledge for basic system restoration, but establishing actual communication with appropriate authorities would require identification of current reception points for classified communications. That would have evolved significantly since the facility's operational period during the early 1960s. The restoration process revealed unexpected system capabilities. The communication equipment had been maintained and periodically updated, despite the facility's official abandonment, suggesting that someone had preserved operational capacity for potential future use rather than simply abandoning classified equipment during decommissioning procedures. The most recent modifications appeared to date from approximately 2005, based on component manufacturing, information and installation characteristics decades after official termination, but still indicating ongoing interest in maintaining secure communication capabilities from the supposedly abandoned facility. The updated components included modern encryption protocols and networking capabilities that would be compatible with current classified communication systems, suggesting either official involvement in maintenance operations or access to restricted technical specifications by organizations with connections to governmental security operations or military contractors specializing in classified communications infrastructure. These capabilities potentially simplified the challenge of establishing contact with appropriate authorities, but raised additional questions about who had maintained these systems and why they had been preserved in an officially abandoned facility, supposedly transferred to county ownership for public auction without security restrictions or content assessment. While completing restoration of the secure communication system, Rebecca detected increased activity in surveillance operations. Monitoring the facility data transmission rates had accelerated significantly, suggesting either automated alerts triggered by her work on classified systems or enhanced monitoring based on intelligence that had increased interest in the facility beyond routine observation established before her property purchase. This escalation created additional urgency for establishing official contact before surveillance operators could implement whatever intervention plans might be developing in response to their monitoring data. The communication system activation process required authentication protocols designed to prevent unauthorized use while establishing credibility with receiving stations that would likely treat unexpected transmissions from long-abandoned facilities with extreme skepticism or potential security concern. The original system documentation included emergency authentication procedures for situations where normal operational credentials might be unavailable, contingency protocols designed to establish basic identity verification while triggering security response appropriate for potentially compromised facilities containing classified technology or sensitive information. Rebecca initiated the emergency authentication sequence, ECONA, process that would identify the facility through coded designations while indicating potential security concerns without specific details that might compromise operational security if communications were intercepted by unauthorized receivers. The protocol was designed to establish official contact and trigger appropriate security response, rather than transmitting sensitive information through potentially compromised channels. Before secure communication could be confirmed through verification procedures managed by receiving authorities, the authentication sequence generated immediate response. The communication system indicated active connection with receiving stations and automated verification protocols that suggested functioning. Classified networks still recognized the facility designation decades after official termination and supposed decommissioning. The response patterns indicated multiple receiving points rather than single-channel communication, suggesting distribution to various security organizations with potential jurisdiction over either the technology involved or the facility location. That might cross organizational boundaries within national security structures. The automated response included instructions for secure transmission of basic information regarding current facility status, personnel present, and immediate security concerns that would help receiving authorities determine appropriate response. Protocols and resource allocation for addressing whatever situation had triggered emergency communication from a facility supposedly decommissioned decades earlier. These instructions provided opportunity for Rebecca to establish her legal ownership position, outline the circumstances of her property purchase through county auction procedures, and express willingness to cooperate with appropriate authorities. Regarding classified technology and high-value assets discovered within her legally acquired property, her transmission emphasized cooperation with national security requirements while maintaining clear documentation of her legal ownership through proper government auction processes, establishing position that recognized both classified technology considerations and property rights protections that should apply to assets acquired through legitimate channels. Despite institutional failures in property assessment and security protocols before public sale, this balanced approach was designed to attract constructive engagement rather than adversarial response that might prioritize classification concerns over legal rights or proper compensation for valuable assets included in her property purchase. The system indicated successful transmission and continued connection with receiving stations, suggesting active monitoring of the communication channel and potential response preparation by authorities who had received her emergency authentication and initial status report. The connection maintenance without immediate message response suggested assessment activities rather than automated systems. Human evaluation of unexpected communication from a facility whose status within current security frameworks would require research and authorization protocols before substantive engagement could be initiated by receiving organizations. While awaiting response through the secure channel, Rebecca continued monitoring surveillance activities, targeting the facility, detecting significant escalation in data transmission and what appeared to be deployment preparations by at least one organization whose equipment indicated potential field operations, rather than simply passive observation or information gathering. The surveillance pattern suggested imminent action rather than continued monitoring, creating urgency beyond the communication timeline that might be required for official response. Through classified channels that typically involved multiple authorization levels and jurisdictional determinations before operational decisions could be implemented through proper security protocols. The situation was further complicated by unusual activities at the property, perimeter vehicle movements suggesting surveillance team repositioning, equipment deployment indicating potential entry operations, and communication patterns that suggested coordination among multiple teams rather than independent observation by competing organizations. These activities created immediate security concerns that might require defensive measures, before official response could be organized through classified communication channels, currently awaiting authorization for substantive engagement beyond automated system acknowledgement of her emergency authentication and status report. Rebecca's combat experience provided tactical advantages in addressing immediate security threats. Her training included perimeter defense, counter-surveillance operations, and response planning for situations where hostile action might proceed. Official support. Despite efforts to establish proper authorization through appropriate channels, her military background had emphasized that survival sometimes required immediate action, based on available information rather than waiting for optimal circumstances or perfect intelligence before addressing imminent threats that could eliminate future options if not confronted during critical vulnerability windows that might not recur once opposition forces established operational momentum. Her immediate defense preparations focused on creating uncertainty rather than direct confrontation, tactical measures designed to complicate potential entry operations without creating situations that might escalate to armed conflict or property damage that could affect both personal safety and legal position regarding facility contents and ownership rights, established through proper auction procedures. The strategy emphasized defensive delays rather than aggressive opposition, creating time for official response through secure channels, rather than attempting to defeat professional entry teams whose resources and personnel would likely exceed her individual capabilities regardless of tactical advantages provided by facility knowledge and defensive preparation opportunities. The secure communication system indicated incoming transmission response from receiving authorities had been authorized after initial assessment of her emergency authentication and status report regarding the supposedly decommissioned facility and its unexpected contents discovered through legitimate property purchase via county auction procedures. The response originated from multiple sources rather than single-channel communication, suggesting coordinated assessment by various security organizations with potential jurisdiction over either the technology involved or the facility location that crossed organizational boundaries within national security structures. The incoming transmission carried official authorization codes that validated Rebecca's communication through secure channels recognition that established legitimate contact, despite unusual circumstances surrounding a supposedly decommissioned facility suddenly reactivating emergency protocols decades after official program termination. The message identified the primary responding authority as Joint Special Operations Command Sensitive Site Exploitation Division, a specialized unit responsible for securing locations containing classified technology, sensitive materials, or information with national security implications that cross traditional jurisdictional boundaries between military branches, intelligence agencies, and civilian government organizations. Project Carbon Forge Facility. This is Commander Sarah Reynolds, JSOC Sensitive Site Exploitation. We've verified your emergency authentication. Be advised that response teams are being dispatched to your location with estimated arrival at approximately 90 minutes. Please maintain secure communication and facility integrity until official personnel can establish proper security protocols and verification procedures. We have detected unauthorized surveillance and potential hostile entry preparations around your perimeter. Can you confirm current security status and personnel present at the facility? The response represented best-case scenario for Rebecca's situation official recognition through proper channels with response prioritization that indicated both seriousness and legitimacy rather than dismissal or skepticism that might have delayed intervention until surveillance teams could implement whatever operations they were currently preparing around the hospital perimeter. The communication established clear authority chain through specialized units designed for exactly these situations, securing sensitive sites containing classified technology or materials inadvertently exposed through circumstances beyond normal. Security protocols. Commander Reynolds, This is Rebecca Winters, former Army combat medic, service number 874392156. I am the legal owner of this property through county. Auction proceedings completed 3 weeks ago, full documentation available, including recorded deed transfer and payment verification. I discovered the hidden facility while assessing structural integrity for residential conversion of the former hospital complex. I am alone at the facility and have established basic defensive measures, but have detected multiple surveillance teams and what appears to be preparation for entry operations by unknown parties. I respectfully request guidance regarding appropriate response pending your team's arrival. Rebecca's reply emphasized both military background and legal ownership, establishing credentials that would help distinguish her situation from potential security breaches involving unauthorized personnel or hostile actors seeking classified technology. The communication maintained professional military protocol while providing essential information regarding current tactical situation and imminent threats that might require response before official teams could arrive to establish proper security measures around the sensitive site. The response came quickly, suggesting active command presence rather than automated systems or delegation to administrative personnel, an indication that her situation had triggered high-priority assessment at senior levels within the specialized unit responsible for sensitive site recovery operations. Ms. Winters, we confirm receipt of your property ownership claim and will address legal considerations appropriately once the immediate security situation is stabilized. Our intelligence indicates multiple unauthorized organizations converging on your location with apparent knowledge of facility contents and potential intent to secure materials before official intervention can be implemented. We're accelerating response team deployment, but recommend immediate activation of facility defensive systems to delay potential entry operations until our personnel can establish proper security perimeter. The communication continued with specific technical instructions. The Carbon Forge facility was equipped with non-lethal defensive countermeasures designed to remain operational despite power interruption or facility abandonment. Access the primary control terminal in the main production area and enter authorization code Sierra-Echo-Charlie-Uniform-Romeo-Echo-4-7-9. This will activate perimeter denial systems that will significantly complicate unauthorized entry attempts without creating life-threatening situations that might escalate beyond containment capabilities. These systems are designed to create confusion, disorientation, and technical interference rather than physical harm, appropriate for delaying hostile entry while maintaining appropriate force limitations for defensive operations conducted without direct supervision by authorized security personnel. The instructions confirmed Rebecca's suspicions about facility design. The abandoned research complex had been equipped with sophisticated security systems beyond the destructive countermeasures, protecting specific storage areas containing valuable materials. These defensive capabilities had apparently been maintained despite official decommissioning, suggesting contingency planning for exactly the situation now unfolding: potential discovery and attempted exploitation by unauthorized parties decades after official project termination and facility abandonment. As Rebecca moved toward the production area to implement the recommended defensive protocols, Commander Reynolds continued providing operational context through the secure channel. Be advised that our intelligence assessment indicates competing interests targeting the facility, including former project contractors with knowledge of facility contents, private security operations working for organizations with connections to international diamond markets, and at least one foreign intelligence service that appears to have recently obtained information regarding Project Carbon Forge, achievements and potential manufacturing capabilities preserved within the abandoned research complex. These competing operations appear to be operating independently rather than in coordination, creating additional tactical complications but potential advantages through their mutual interference and limited information sharing. The intelligence assessment matched Rebecca's observations regarding surveillance activities, multiple teams with different equipment configurations, operational protocols, and apparent objectives suggested competing interests rather than coordinated operations by a single organization. This competition created potential advantages through confusion, resource division, and operational constraints imposed by each team's need to conceal their activities, not just from legitimate authorities, but from other unauthorized parties simultaneously, targeting the same facility with potentially conflicting objectives. The primary control terminal activated immediately upon receiving the authorization, code suggesting power maintenance systems that had preserved critical functionality despite decades of facility abandonment. The defensive systems menu displayed multiple options ranging from simple perimeter notification to comprehensive countermeasures involving sensory disorientation, electronic interference, and environmental modifications designed to create confusion, without causing permanent injury or property damage that might trigger escalation beyond containment objectives appropriate for defensive operations. Rebecca selected the comprehensive defensive protocol recommended in the secure communication triggering systematic activation of countermeasures throughout the hospital complex and surrounding property perimeter. The system confirmed successful implementation with status indicators showing active perimeter coverage, surveillance disruption measures, and environmental modifications designed to complicate unauthorized entry attempts through multiple approach vectors that surveillance teams might utilize to access the hidden facility within the larger hospital complex. The immediate effects became apparent through surveillance monitoring equipment. She had accessed earlier electronic interference patterns, disrupted transmission capabilities. Sensory systems showed environmental modifications that would complicate visual observation and movement coordination, and what appeared to be targeted countermeasures specifically affecting communication. Equipment utilized by teams attempting to establish entry coordination around the property perimeter. The defensive systems appeared to incorporate sophisticated targeting capabilities that could distinguish between different equipment configurations and operational protocols, suggesting adaptive response rather than simple area denial measures that might affect all electronic systems equally regardless of origin or purpose. Defensive systems successfully activated, Rebecca reported through the secure channel maintained despite the electronic countermeasures, now affecting surveillance operations throughout the property. Monitoring indicates significant disruption to surveillance capabilities and apparent coordination difficulties among teams attempting to establish entry positions around various access points. Current estimates suggest delay capabilities of approximately 45 to 60 minutes before determined opposition might overcome defensive countermeasures through equipment modification or operational adaptation to environmental challenges. Commander Reynolds acknowledged the status update with additional tactical guidance. Excellent work, Ms. Winters. Our response team has secured priority transport and revised arrival estimate is now approximately 65 minutes, creating potential gap between defensive system effectiveness and official security implementation. If entry appears imminent before our team arrival, we recommend relocation to the primary storage vault within the production facility. That area was designed with independent defensive capabilities and environmental sustainability features that would maintain your safety even if perimeter security is compromised. The vault entrance can be secured through authentication protocol Delta-Victor-7-7-4-Tango, which will activate internal defensive measures while preventing access to the most sensitive materials and equipment until proper security. Personnel can implement appropriate containment and transportation procedures. The guidance confirmed Rebecca's assessment of the facility's layered security design, providing multiple defensive positions with increasing protection levels from perimeter countermeasures through progressive containment. Zones leading to core storage areas containing the most valuable materials and sensitive technology. This architecture reflected standard classified facility design principles she had encountered during military training. Concentric security layers, providing defense in-depth capabilities that could maintain protection for critical assets even if outer perimeter measures were compromised through determined opposition or unexpected vulnerability exploitation. As the defensive systems continued disrupting surveillance and entry preparations, Rebecca gathered essential documentation regarding her property ownership, facility discovery circumstances, and initial communications with official authorities. Responding through proper channels to secure the classified technology and valuable materials inadvertently included in her county auction purchase. This documentation would prove crucial for establishing her legal position once immediate security concerns had been addressed, providing clear evidence regarding proper acquisition, responsible reporting through appropriate channels, and cooperation with official response protocols. Once the classified nature of her discovery became apparent through systematic exploration of the property she had legally purchased, the surveillance monitoring equipment showed increasingly determined efforts to overcome defensive countermeasures, equipment modifications attempting to compensate for electronic interference, operational adjustments to address environmental challenges, and what appeared to be reinforcement arrivals suggesting escalation beyond initial entry teams that had been conducting surveillance before defensive systems activation. These developments indicated that at least some organizations targeting the facility possessed resources and tactical capabilities exceeding normal private security operations, suggesting connections to either government contractors with military-grade equipment or potentially foreign intelligence services with sophisticated field operation capabilities that could adapt to unexpected defensive measures through rapid deployment of specialized countermeasure equipment. Commander Reynolds, surveillance indicates escalation beyond initial estimates, reinforcement personnel, and specialized equipment, suggesting capabilities exceeding standard private security operations. Current assessment indicates potential perimeter compromise within 30 to 40 minutes, based on observed adaptation rate and equipment deployment patterns. I am preparing for potential relocation to primary vault if entry appears imminent before your team arrival. The response carried increased urgency. Confirmed. Ms. Winters, our latest intelligence indicates primary threat from Axiom Strategic Resources Private, military contractor with connections to several international diamond cartels and apparent historical knowledge of Project Carbon Forge through former personnel involvement with original research program consultants. Their operational capabilities include military-grade electronic countermeasures, specialized entry teams with advanced training, and legal resources attempting to generate emergency court orders claiming national security authority for site seizure pending proper investigation of classified technology potentially compromised through improper property disposition procedures. This intelligence provided crucial context regarding the most significant threat among competing organizations targeting the facility, identifying specific capabilities, potential legal maneuvers, and historical connections that explain their apparent knowledge of facility contents despite decades of official secrecy surrounding Project Carbon Forge, achievements and continued existence of materials preserved within the abandoned research complex. The identification of specific organizations also created potential for legal accountability that might not exist with anonymous threats, establishing responsibility for any illegal entry attempts or property damage that might occur during operations against illegally purchased property, regardless of its classified contents or historical research activities. Commander Reynolds continued with additional tactical guidance. We've initiated emergency judicial intervention to block any attempted legal maneuvers that might provide cover for unauthorized entry operations. Federal security protocols supersede local jurisdiction regarding classified technology recovery. regardless of property transfer circumstances or current ownership status. This intervention should prevent legitimate law enforcement involvement that might inadvertently provide cover for private operations attempting to utilize official authorities as operational shields for unauthorized recovery activities. The secure communication channel suddenly indicated multiple incoming transmissions, suggesting escalation beyond initial response coordination to broader governmental awareness of the situation developing around a supposedly abandoned research facility, suddenly triggering emergency protocols and high priority security response from specialized units designed for sensitive site exploitation and classified technology recovery operations. The communication system indicated transmissions from Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and what appeared to be National Security Council coordination channels, suggesting unusual attention at senior government levels beyond normal classified technology recovery operations. Ms. Winters, be advised that your situation has attracted attention beyond standard recovery protocols due to both the historical significance of Project Carbon Forge and current technical applications for manufacturing capabilities preserved within the facility. The materials and technology represent not just historical artifacts, but potentially viable production capacity that remains classified despite technological advances since the original research program. We now have direct National Security Council attention and priority authorization for all necessary resources to secure the facility and ensure appropriate protection for both classified technology and your legal interests regarding property acquisition through proper government auction procedures. This escalation represented significant advantage, creating potential for expedited resolution that would address both security requirements and property rights considerations through direct engagement at senior government levels rather than standard bureaucratic processes that might require months or years to navigate complex jurisdictional questions and competing claims regarding classified technology inadvertently transferred through public auction processes. The National Security Council involvement suggested recognition that the situation required coordinated response across multiple agencies rather than standard classification enforcement that might prioritize security concerns without adequate consideration of legitimate property rights established through proper governmental processes, despite institutional failures in property assessment before public sale. The surveillance monitoring showed first physical testing of perimeter defenses, entry attempts encountering environmental countermeasures that created disorientation, equipment failures preventing coordinated operations, and what appeared to be communication breakdowns between teams attempting to establish synchronized access through multiple entry points that might overwhelm defensive capabilities through simultaneous penetration rather than concentrated force against specific vulnerabilities. The defensive systems appeared to be functioning as designed, creating confusion and operational complications without dangerous escalation that might trigger lethal force responses from increasingly frustrated entry teams encountering unexpected resistance from supposedly abandoned facilities. Rebecca began systematic preparation for potential relocation to the primary storage vault, gathering essential documentation, communication equipment, and basic supplies that might be required during extended security operations once official response teams arrived to establish proper containment protocols and technology recovery procedures appropriate for classified materials inadvertently transferred through public auction processes. The documentation emphasized her legal ownership, cooperation with proper authorities upon discovery, and willingness to address national security concerns through appropriate channels, rather than public disclosure or private exploitation that might compromise classified technology or valuable materials preserved within the facility. The secure communication channel indicated incoming priority transmission. Commander Reynolds providing critical update regarding response team status and tactical situation developing around the hospital complex. Miss Winters, we have confirmation That Axiom personnel have secured local law enforcement cooperation through falsified federal documentation claiming authority for emergency site containment pending national security investigation. This development creates significant complications as legitimate police resources may inadvertently provide operational cover for unauthorized recovery attempts while potentially interfering with our official response team deployment through standard jurisdictional confusion that often occurs during classified recovery operations in civilian environments. This intelligence represented serious escalation, creating potential for confused confrontation between legitimate authorities if local law enforcement had been successfully manipulated into supporting private recovery operations through falsified documentation that might appear authentic to officials unfamiliar with proper classification protocols or verification procedures for federal security operations. The situation highlighted vulnerabilities within compartmentalized security systems, where information restrictions designed to protect classified programs could create verification challenges when competing organizations presented conflicting credentials in civilian jurisdictions unprepared for determining legitimate authority regarding classified technology recovery operations. Commander Reynolds continued with adjusted tactical guidance. We've initiated emergency notification to all legitimate law enforcement channels to prevent misguided interference with official recovery operations, but recommend immediate relocation to primary vault to ensure your safety during potential confusion period while jurisdictional clarification is established through proper channels. Our response team has secured air transportation with revised arrival estimate of approximately 25 minutes to primary facility location, but potential ground transportation complications if local roadblocks have been established through manipulated law enforcement resources. The recommendation aligned with Rebecca's tactical assessment. The developing situation created unacceptable risk levels as confusion between legitimate and unauthorized operations might create dangerous conditions where identification challenges could escalate beyond non-lethal containment appropriate for classified technology recovery without creating unnecessary casualties or property damage. The primary vault would provide both physical security and communication capabilities that could maintain official coordination while eliminating exposure to potential confrontation between competing organizations attempting to secure facility access through various means ranging from direct entry operations to manipulated legal authorities, providing operational cover for unauthorized recovery attempts. As Rebecca prepared for relocation to the primary vault, the surveillance monitoring showed significant perimeter activity, vehicles with local law enforcement markings arriving at access points, while personnel in mixed uniforms suggesting both official police presence and private security operations established what appeared to be containment positions around the hospital complex. The operational pattern displayed confusion rather than coordinated response, suggesting legitimate law enforcement personnel implementing standard containment procedures while private operators attempted to utilize this official presence as cover for unauthorized entry operations targeting specific facility sections containing the hidden research complex and valuable materials preserved within secured storage areas. The vault access required navigation through production areas containing the specialized manufacturing equipment that had created the extraordinary synthetic diamonds documented in inventory records, massive pressure vessels, control systems, and material preparation stations that represented technological achievement, still considered advanced by contemporary standards despite being developed during early 1960s research operations. The equipment showed remarkable preservation, quality suggesting ongoing maintenance, despite official facility abandonment or extraordinary design specifications that enabled decades of operational readiness without active intervention or environmental control beyond passive systems incorporated into facility construction during the original project implementation. The vault entrance incorporated multiple security layers, physical barriers requiring specific access procedures, electronic verification systems designed to prevent unauthorized entry, and what appeared to be biometric authentication capabilities, suggesting personalized access restrictions beyond standard key codes or entry credentials, typically utilized in classified storage facilities. The authentication protocol provided by Commander Reynolds bypassed these graduated security measures, suggesting emergency access provisions designed for recovery operations when normal authentication might be unavailable due to personnel absence, documentation loss, or facility compromise requiring immediate intervention by security forces without standard access credentials. The vault interior revealed extraordinary preservation conditions, temperature and humidity, control maintaining optimal storage environment for both documents and physical materials, lighting systems that activated upon entry despite decades of facility abandonment, and organizational systems suggesting careful cataloging and inventory management rather than hasty storage during facility decommissioning operations. The space contained not just the diamond inventory documented in facility records, but comprehensive research archives including manufacturing specifications, quality testing results, and what appeared to be ongoing development plans that had continued beyond official program termination despite supposed research discontinuation and facility abandonment. The security communication system maintained connectivity despite relocation. Commander Reynolds providing status updates regarding official response team deployment, jurisdictional clarification efforts with local law enforcement, and developing situation around the hospital complex as competing organizations attempted various approaches to facility access, ranging from falsified documentation to direct entry attempts against defensive countermeasures, still actively complicating unauthorized operations throughout the property perimeter. Ms. Winters, our response team has encountered roadblock complications, but has implemented alternative insertion protocols that should maintain our arrival timeline within acceptable parameters. Be advised that we have confirmed National Security Council authorization for provisional agreement regarding your property rights and potential compensation arrangements once immediate security concerns have been addressed through proper protocols. This authorization represents unusual recognition of both your legitimate acquisition through proper channels and responsible REPOR-TING once classified materials were discovered during normal property assessment activities following legal purchase completion. This communication represented extraordinary development, suggesting potential resolution that would address both security requirements and property rights considerations through direct authorization at senior government levels rather than extended legal proceedings that might otherwise result from competing claims regarding classified technology and valuable materials inadvertently transferred through public auction processes. The National Security Council authorization indicated recognition that standard classification enforcement might create unjust outcomes without consideration of legitimate property rights established through proper governmental processes despite institutional failures in property assessment before public sale. Rebecca maintained secure position within the primary vault while monitoring external developments through surveillance systems accessible from the protected location, observing increasingly confused operations as legitimate law enforcement began receiving clarification regarding falsified documentation, while official response teams established communication with local authorities to prevent jurisdictional conflicts during classified technology recovery operations. The situation displayed gradual resolution of initial confusion as proper authority channels established operational coordination, replacing the competing claims and contradictory documentation that had temporarily created dangerous uncertainty regarding legitimate security jurisdiction over the hospital complex and its hidden research facilities. The secure communication system indicated incoming priority transmission. Commander Reynolds providing crucial update regarding imminent Response team arrival and operational coordination with local authorities, now properly briefed regarding classification requirements and security protocols appropriate for sensitive technology recovery operations. Ms. Winters, our team has cleared final approach and will establish facility control within approximately 10 minutes. We have successfully implemented jurisdictional clarification with local law enforcement, who are now providing perimeter support against unauthorized entry attempts while awaiting proper documentation regarding classified technology recovery procedures. Unauthorized operators are currently withdrawing from active entry attempts as official presence has eliminated operational cover previously established through falsified documentation and manipulated legal authorities. This development represented successful resolution of immediate security concerns, establishing proper authority through legitimate channels while eliminating confused jurisdictional questions that had temporarily created dangerous operational environment where competing organizations could potentially exploit uncertainty regarding proper security protocols and authorization requirements for classified technology recovery operations. The withdrawal of unauthorized operators suggested recognition that official intervention had eliminated viable opportunities for acquiring facility contents through either direct entry operations or manipulated legal authorities, providing operational cover for private recovery attempts targeting valuable materials and classified technology preserved within the hidden research complex. Commander Reynolds, I confirm secure position within primary vault with essential documentation regarding property acquisition, facility discovery circumstances, and initial response through appropriate channels once classified materials were identified during normal property assessment following legal purchase completion. The resolution framework acknowledged both immediate security requirements and longer-term considerations regarding property rights, compensation arrangements, and potential ongoing involvement that recognized Rebecca's unique qualifications. Through military background, responsible reporting, and exemplary handling of complex circumstances that might justify unusual arrangements beyond standard classification enforcement that typically excluded civilian participation, regardless of acquisition circumstances or personal qualifications that might otherwise support appropriate involvement under carefully designed security protocols. As the assessment team began systematic documentation and security implementation regarding classified materials and manufacturing equipment, Commander Reynolds addressed practical considerations regarding Rebecca's immediate circumstances following property acquisition, now complicated by classification requirements that would necessarily affect her original housing plans despite legitimate purchase through proper governmental auction procedures. The National Security Council authorization includes immediate practical provisions addressing your housing situation, acknowledging that classification enforcement will necessarily affect your intended property use despite legitimate acquisition through proper channels. These provisions include both temporary arrangements during resolution processes and potential permanent solutions depending on your preferences regarding location, privacy requirements, and professional opportunities that might be appropriate. Given your military background and exemplary handling of this extraordinary situation, this practical acknowledgement represented significant consideration beyond standard security operations, recognizing human dimensions, beyond immediate classification enforcement, and demonstrating institutional awareness that proper resolution required addressing personal circumstances created by governmental failures in property assessment before public auction rather than focusing exclusively on technical security requirements without consideration of impacts on individuals affected by institutional errors in classification management and property disposition procedures. Commander, I appreciate both the professional response to immediate security concerns and the extraordinary consideration regarding longer-term resolution that recognizes both legitimate property rights and practical circumstances resulting from this unusual situation. My primary concerns involve stable housing appropriate for addressing ongoing medical needs resulting from service-connected disabilities, while establishing sustainable living arrangements that would allow proper focus on recovery and potential professional development beyond the temporary solutions that necessitated this property purchase when conventional housing options proved unsuitable for specific requirements related to service-connected conditions. Rebecca's response maintained professional focus on practical resolution, while providing context regarding specific needs that had motivated her original property purchase, creating foundation for meaningful arrangements that would address both immediate circumstances and longer-term considerations appropriate for someone whose responsible handling of classified materials suggested potential for appropriate involvement beyond standard civilian exclusion typically applied regardless of personal qualifications or acquisition circumstances. Commander Reynolds nodded with understanding that reflected professional appreciation for both immediate cooperation regarding security protocols and legitimate concerns regarding personal circumstances resulting from classification enforcement that would necessarily affect property utilization. Despite legal acquisition through proper governmental processes, the provisional authorization specifically addresses stability considerations for service-connected veterans encountering classification circumstances through no fault of their own, creating flexible frameworks for addressing both immediate needs and longer-term arrangements appropriate for someone whose background and responsible handling demonstrate capabilities exceeding standard civilian classification boundaries, typically applied without consideration of individual qualifications or acquisition circumstances. The systematic assessment continued throughout the Hidden Research Facility professional documentation regarding classified technology, manufacturing equipment, and valuable materials preserved within the abandoned complex that had somehow transferred through governmental property disposition processes despite extraordinary value and security implications that should have prevented public auction without proper content evaluation and classification enforcement before sale completion. The assessment revealed not just historical artifacts, but potentially viable production capabilities representing significant value beyond the physical inventory already documented through facility records discovered during Rebecca's initial exploration following legal property acquisition. As the initial security implementation progressed toward comprehensive containment appropriate for classified technology protection, Commander Reynolds addressed broader implications beyond immediate operational considerations. Ms. Winters, the National Security Council authorization includes unusual provisions regarding potential ongoing involvement that your military background and responsible handling might justify, despite classification requirements that typically prevent civilian participation regardless of acquisition circumstances or personal qualifications. These provisions include potential consulting arrangements regarding both historical documentation and contemporary applications that remain valuable for national security purposes, while offering professional opportunities beyond standard resolution processes that might otherwise focus exclusively on property compensation without consideration of human capital represented by someone demonstrating exceptional capabilities during extraordinary circumstances. This approach represented remarkable departure from standard classification enforcement, suggesting recognition that unique rediscovery circumstances and exemplary handling might justify creative arrangements beyond default security protocols that typically excluded civilian involvement regardless of personal qualifications or legitimate acquisition through proper governmental processes. The provisional framework acknowledged both immediate security necessities and potential longer-term benefits through appropriate involvement by someone whose background and demonstrated responsibility suggested capabilities beyond standard civilian Boundaries typically enforced without consideration of individual qualifications or extraordinary circumstances surrounding classified material discovery. The assessment team completed initial security implementation, establishing proper containment protocols, documentation procedures, and preliminary inventory verification appropriate for classified technology protection while preserving evidence. Regarding legitimate property acquisition through proper governmental processes despite institutional failures in security assessment before public auction. The operation displayed professional efficiency without unnecessary disruption, suggesting experienced personnel with appropriate training regarding sensitive site exploitation and classified material recovery in civilian environments where property rights considerations required balanced approaches beyond default security enforcement that might otherwise create unnecessary legal complications through failure to acknowledge legitimate ownership established through proper channels. Despite institutional errors in property disposition procedures, Commander Reynolds provided summary assessment as initial security operations transition toward comprehensive resolution planning appropriate for the extraordinary circumstances surrounding Project Carbon Forge rediscovery through legitimate property transfer. Ms. Winters, our preliminary assessment confirms both the historical significance and contemporary value of materials preserved within this facility, creating strong foundation for appropriate resolution that addresses your property rights while enabling proper security implementation regarding classified technology that remains sensitive despite technological advances since the original research program. The National Security Council authorization provides framework for balanced resolution that recognizes both legitimate acquisition through proper channels and exemplary handling once classified materials were discovered during normal property assessment following legal purchase completion. The assessment acknowledged both security requirements and property considerations that would require thoughtful resolution through processes that maintained classification protection while providing appropriate recognition of ownership rights. Established through proper governmental procedures, despite institutional failures in security assessment before public sale. This balanced approach suggested potential for favorable outcomes beyond adversarial proceedings that might otherwise result from competing claims. Regarding classified technology inadvertently transferred through auction processes without proper content evaluation or security clearance verification before property disposition. Rebecca maintained professional cooperation regarding security protocols while ensuring proper documentation of both property rights and responsible reporting through appropriate channels, creating foundation for resolution processes that would address competing interests through balanced consideration, rather than default classification enforcement that might prioritize immediate security concerns without adequate attention to legitimate ownership established through proper governmental processes despite institutional failures in property assessment before public auction. The official response established comprehensive security while initiating resolution processes that acknowledged both classification requirements and property rights considerations, creating potential for outcomes that would address national security concerns while providing appropriate compensation and potential opportunities. Reflecting Rebecca's military background, responsible reporting, and exemplary handling of extraordinary circumstances beyond typical civilian encounters with classified materials inadvertently transferred through governmental property disposition failures. As the initial security operation stabilized into comprehensive protection appropriate for classified technology and valuable materials, Commander Reynolds addressed transition toward longer-term resolution through processes authorized by National Security Council directives specifically addressing the unique circumstances surrounding Project Carbon Forge rediscovery through legitimate property transfer to a former military service member with appropriate background for recognizing classification requirements while maintaining proper documentation regarding legal acquisition through governmental processes. The provisional resolution framework includes immediate arrangements addressing your housing situation, while longer-term considerations receive proper evaluation through balanced processes acknowledging both security requirements and legitimate property rights established through proper channels despite institutional failures in classification management and property disposition procedures. These arrangements include appropriate compensation reflecting professional valuation of discovered materials, while potential partnership opportunities remain under consideration pending comprehensive assessment regarding both security implications and personal qualifications that might justify unusual arrangements beyond standard civilian exclusion typically applied regardless of acquisition circumstances or individual capabilities. This approach represented thoughtful consideration beyond immediate security operations, recognizing human dimensions requiring appropriate attention, alongside technical classification requirements that would necessarily affect property utilization. Despite legitimate acquisition through proper governmental processes, the provisional framework acknowledged both immediate needs and longer-term considerations appropriate for someone whose responsible handling suggested potential for arrangements beyond standard resolution processes, typically focusing exclusively on classification enforcement without consideration of individual qualifications or extraordinary circumstances surrounding rediscovery through legitimate property transfer rather than unauthorized access or deliberate security breaches typically associated with civilian encounters with classified materials. The National Security Council authorization created foundation for resolution, addressing competing interests through balanced processes rather than adversarial proceedings, establishing framework acknowledging both classification requirements and property rights while providing flexibility regarding potential arrangements appropriate for the unique circumstances surrounding Project Carbon Forge. Rediscovery through legitimate channels rather than hostile actions or deliberate classification. Violations that would typically justify maximum enforcement without consideration of mitigating factors or exceptional handling, demonstrating responsibility beyond standard civilian expectations. Regarding classified material encounters, 6 months later, Rebecca stood before the renovated building that now served as both her residence and professional consultation office. A custom-designed facility incorporating specific features, addressing service-connected requirements while providing appropriate security for limited classified operations authorized through unprecedented arrangements reflecting both her military background and exemplary handling during Project Carbon Forge rediscovery. The resolution had exceeded her expectations, providing not just fair compensation for valuable materials discovered within her legally purchased property, but professional opportunities utilizing her unique combination of medical training, military experience, and demonstrated responsibility regarding sensitive information encountered through extraordinary circumstances beyond typical civilian classification boundaries. The resolution had addressed immediate housing needs while creating sustainable career path, connecting her medical background with specialized material applications for advanced prosthetics, rehabilitation equipment, and treatment protocols utilizing synthetic diamond components for durability exceeding conventional materials, while providing biocompatibility advantages crucial for long-term medical implants and mobility assistance devices, serving wounded veterans with complex rehabilitation requirements similar to her own service-connected conditions. The specialized consultation role provided meaningful purpose beyond basic survival, creating opportunity to transform combat medical experience into contributions, serving fellow veterans through technology applications that might otherwise have remained classified without beneficial deployment, addressing critical needs within military and civilian medical communities, serving those injured during national service. The balanced resolution had served multiple interests, addressing classification requirements regarding sensitive manufacturing technology while enabling beneficial applications serving national priorities, through appropriate deployment addressing specific medical challenges facing wounded veterans requiring advanced materials exceeding conventional healthcare resources. The arrangement provided appropriate compensation for property rights, while creating professional opportunities reflecting unique qualifications demonstrated through responsible handling of classified materials encountered through legitimate acquisition rather than unauthorized access or deliberate security violations typically associated with civilian classification incidents, requiring maximum enforcement without consideration of mitigating circumstances or exceptional responsibility. Rebecca's journey from homeless veteran to specialized consultant represented extraordinary transformation through circumstances that could have resulted in either continued hardship or adversarial proceedings without the balanced resolution framework established through National Security Council authorization, acknowledging both classification requirements and legitimate property rights deserving appropriate consideration, despite institutional failures in security assessment before public auction. The outcome demonstrated potential for addressing competing interests through thoughtful processes rather than default responses that might serve immediate security concerns while creating unnecessary complications through failure to recognize legitimate acquisition through proper governmental channels, despite classification implications that should have prevented public sale without appropriate content, evaluation and security clearance verification before property disposition. The experience had transformed desperate survival measures into meaningful contribution opportunities, converting combat, medical training, and personal rehabilitation challenges into specialized knowledge, serving fellow veterans through technology applications that might otherwise have remained classified without beneficial deployment, addressing critical needs within communities, serving those injured during national service. The resolution demonstrated potential for addressing both institutional failures and individual circumstances through balanced processes acknowledging competing interests while seeking outcomes, serving multiple priorities rather than adversarial proceedings, focusing exclusively on classification enforcement without consideration of legitimate acquisition through proper governmental processes, despite security implications that should have prevented public sale without appropriate content. Evaluation before property disposition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.